Study Session 13. Theories of Disability in Health Practice and Research. Introduction. You will be exposed to the theories of disability and the use in health practice and research. Each of the theories will be explained based on emphasis or role to cure and to maintain the normal functioning of individuals and of society. Objectives. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to 1. Discuss theories of disability in health practice and research. 2. Comment on some ethical sociocultural issues involved in positivist disability research. Content. The experience of disability. Over the past 20 years, writings by disabled people have transformed our understanding of the real nature of disability. They move beyond the personal limitations that impaired individuals may face to social restrictions imposed by an unthinking society. Disability is understood as a social and political issue rather than a medical one, and this leads to critical questioning of medical interventions. Attempt to cure impairment or to restore normal bodily functioning. Instead, social and political solutions are sought to challenge disabling discrimination. This radically different view is called the social model of disability or social oppression theory. While respecting the value of scientifically based medical research, this approach calls for more research based on social theories of disability. If research is to improve the quality of disabled people's lives, definitions are centered to understanding theories of impairment and disability. In 1986, Disabled People's International made a clear distinction. Impairment is the functional limitation within the individual caused by physical, mental, or sensory impairment. Disability is the loss or limitation of opportunities to take part in the normal life of the community on an equal level with others because of physical and social barriers. This scheme accepts that some illness have disabling consequences, and disabled people at times are ill. It may be entirely appropriate for doctors to treat illness of all kinds, such as bronchitis or ulcers. Yet, it questions why. For example, doctors should decide about access to welfare services, such as education or disability living allowance. Theories of impairment, disability, and illness influence which aspects of disabled people's lives require health treatment, or policy development, or political action, are sometimes radical alternatives. Positivism and disability research. Health research about impairment and disability is dominated by positivist theories. It focuses on searches for cures, means of reducing impairment, or assessment of clinical interventions and users' method, such as controlled trials, random statistical samples, and structured questionnaires. Even when researching disability, in the sense given above, positivist research tends to use the World Health Organization's classification, now being revised at the insistence of disabled people, which is difficult, if not impossible, to apply in research terms and yields few useful data. Disabled people are beginning to influence scientific research. This influence poses difficulties for positivist research in questioning one of its bedrocks, the notion of objectivity. Although positivist researchers accept that subjectivity can be studied objectively, they resist involving subjects for fear of bias. However, scientific researchers often use the words suffering and victim as if they are accurate descriptions and not untested, biased assumptions which many disabled people do not experience. In contrast, social constructionism sees experience and subjectivity as central to the research process, and critical theory sees disabling barriers as a key research issue. Though these theories pose intellectual challenges, almost all funding goes to positivist research. Interventions to normalize impairment. We have impairment, intervention, and alternatives. Under impairment, we have deafness. Under intervention, we have cochlear implants. And under alternatives, we have sign language teaching in schools. Under impairment, we also have cerebral palsy. Under intervention, we have conductive education. And under alternatives, we have barrier removal. Under impairment, we have achondroplasia. Under intervention, we have limb lengthening. And under alternatives, we have barrier removal, awareness raising. Also under impairment, we have Down syndrome. Under intervention, we have cosmetic surgery. Under alternatives, we have awareness raising. Under impairment, we have congenital conditions. Under intervention, we have genetic screening. And other alternatives, we have legislation for equal opportunities. The influence of implicit and explicit positivism on the Department of Health, which it seems has discovered the user, is shown in a recent report. The NHS is attaching increasing importance to seeking out and acting upon the views of its users on the coverage and delivery of the service it provides. The program has spent £3.9 million on 30 projects, all are located in universities or the health service. Despite consumer views being the second main priority for selecting research proposals, disabled people have not been involved. None of the organizations have received funding, and no project could be said to be based on the social model of disability. They are all based on positivist theories. Social approaches within positivism. Positivist social medicine recognizes the social context to impairment as well as disability, and it examines environments as well as individuals. Hence, public health measures concerned with sanitation, poverty, health education, and the like have proved extremely effective in preventing rather than curing a range of impairments such as tuberculosis, polio, rickets, and river blindness. Prevention of impairments is complicated. However, by prenatal screening to prevent conditions such as Down syndromes, cystic fibrosis, or Huntington's chorea, and by research into genetic engineering, leaving aside the efficacy of such interventions, they pose profound ethical, social, and cultural issues for us all. Life and death decisions are vested in the hands of people who have very little understanding of the reality of disabled people's lives. With the lack of systematic evidence, why should doctors assume, for example, that life with Down syndrome is not worth living? Social approaches to disability within positivism classify and count disabled people. Although some support this work, others question the accuracy of the data and say that they yield few significant changes for disabled people. Recent research attempting to combine theories and scientific measures of the extent of disabling barriers with disabled people's own experiences, of the extent and nature of those barriers, involves disabled people in designing, collecting, and analyzing the data. Its success remains to be seen. Functionalist theory and disability. Influential functionalists emphasize medicine's role to cure and to maintain the normal functioning of individuals and of society. In this model, the sick role involves being complained and wanting to get well. This can make people with incurable conditions, including disabled people who are classified as sick, seem to be deviant. The link between disability and social defiance that functionalists make influences healthcare and research and supports the continued dominance of professionally controlled health and welfare services for disabled people. Thus, under current welfare arrangements, more than 70% of spending goes on the salaries of professionals working with disabled people. Only recently has this been reduced through the funding of independent living schemes controlled by disabled people. A variant of functionalism, normalization, theory underlies some programs that claim to enable devalued people to lead culturally valued lives. An example of this controversial approach is cosmetic surgery for people with Down syndromes. Functionalism confuses impairment and disability with the sick role. By failing to recognize that disabled people do not necessarily have something wrong with them, it simply reproduces discriminatory norms and values instead of addressing the cultural and economic forces that precipitate them. The crucial problem is that disabled people, regardless of the type of severity of their impairment, are not a homogeneous group that can be accommodated easily within a society that takes little account of their individual or collective needs. As with the whole population, disabled people differ widely in terms of ethnic backgrounds, sexual orientations, ages, abilities, religious beliefs, wealth, access to work, and so on. Clearly, their situation cannot be understood or indeed transformed by any policy based on narrow theories of conventional normality or uniformity. Social constructionism. This theoretical approach is centrally concerned with meaning. It shows the crucial importance of learning from disabled people's experience to understand meanings of disability. For example, blindness differs according to the economic and cultural context. A classical study in the United States shows that blindness was experienced as loss requiring counseling. In Sweden, it is regarded as a problem requiring support services. In Britain, it is taken as a technical issue requiring aids and equipment. And in Italy, it is taken as the need to seek consolation or even salvation through the Catholic Church. Anthropologists and historians show how different societies produce certain types of diseases, impairment, and disability. Disability can be produced by the disability business. In modern America, industrialization, the subsequent growth of the human service sector, and the more recent politicization of disability rights by the American Disabled Peoples Movement have transformed disability and rehabilitation into a multi-millionaire dollar enterprise. Disability becomes a commodity and a source of income for doctors, lawyers, rehabilitation professionals, and disability activists. These examples treat disability as a shared experience, in contrast with conventional individualistic interpretations. Yet, Each fails to address key structural factors. Consequently, disabled people tend to be treated as an abstract, somewhat distinct from the rest of human race, and the crucial question of the causes of disability is forced rather than clarified. For example, how is disability physically based but socially constructed by the disabling environment? Postmodernism. Postmodernism sees society in terms of fragmented and complex social structures in which social class has less importance, and other sources of social differences, including sex, ethnicity, sexuality, and disability, having more importance. Postmodernists call into question any of the certainties of earlier eras, creating multiple meanings for practically everything. This theory has, as yet, had little impact on health research about disability. However, a study on concept of health body, so central to government health promotion, is beginning to show how this concept can, in themselves, be disabling, unrealistic, and oppressive. Health promotion is working against popular culture, attempting to construct a view of health that is not privately held. In other words, to have impairment is not necessarily unhealthy. Disabled people are not actually ill, and confusion between impairment and illness fails to deal with complex meaning in the postmodern world. Critical theory. Critical theory covers similar ground to the other theories discussed here, but it sees disabled people's problems explicitly as the product of an unequal society. It ties the solution to social action and change. Notions of disability as a social oppression mean that prejudice and discrimination disable and restrict people's lives much more than impairments do. So, for example, the problem with public transport is not the inability of some people to walk, but that buses are not designed to take wheelchairs. Such a problem can be cured by spending money, not by surgical intervention, assistive computer technology, or rehabilitation. Ideologies perpetuate practical barriers and exclusions. As long as disability is assumed to be an individual matter of personal tragedy or heroic triumph over difficulty, disabled people are excluded from society. Ordinary education, employment, buildings, public transport, and other things which most people can take for granted remain largely closed to disabled people, or at least they present obstacles which each person has to tackle individually. By emphasizing deficiency and dependency, doctors tend to reinforce these ideologies. The impact of this critical theorizing on healthcare and research has tended to be indirect. It has raised political awareness, helped with the collective empowerment of disabled people, and publicized disabled people's critical views on healthcare. It has criticized the medical control exerted over many disabled people's lives, such as repeated and unnecessary visits to clinics for impairments that do not change and are not illnesses in need of treatment. Finally, it suggests a more appropriate societal framework for providing health services for disabled people. Conclusion. Implicit and explicit social theorizing, coupled with disabled people's insistence that their voices be heard, has begun to change understandings of the nature of impairment and disability. The new understandings pose key questions for healthcare and research if they are going to provide an appropriate knowledge base for both medical and social progress. Summary. In this lecture, we are focused on different theories of disability. More so, examined various psychological theories postulated to explain disability as it applies the meaning of disability and disabled people's problem. End of study session 13. Thank you for listening.